Hello and welcome to my list of the top films of 2017. First, I think I should address the elephant in the room and acknowledge the amount of scandal that's been coming out of Hollywood ever since Weinstein got busted. I commend all the victims standing up and telling their stories, and I hope this creates an environment where people in positions of power can no longer get away with any kind of misconduct. All that aside, I think in terms of movies it's been a good year for film nerds, and I reckon there's been something for everyone this year. Sci-fi fans got the likes of Blade Runner 2049 and Star Wars The Last Jedi. Superhero fans got Spider-Man Homecoming, Justice League and Wonder Woman. Horror fans got It and Get Out. And we got some great family films like Paddington 2 and Coco. Keep in mind, I'm only one man, so I didn't have time to see everything this year, but this is just my list of films I'd recommend. Enjoy. Coming in at number 10, we've got Free Fire from director Ben Wheatley. The film starred Sharlto Copley, Armie Hammer, Brie Larson and Cillian Murphy, and is an action comedy which takes place in the 70s and is set wholly in an abandoned warehouse. The film follows a shootout between a gang of IRA members and a gang of arms dealers, with Larson's character being caught in the middle. I found the film to be an excellent blend of action and humour, and I got the impression the cast were having a blast sinking their teeth into their characters. It's not a perfect film by any means, but it's certainly one to check out and I think deserves more attention than it got. The characters are memorable and it strikes a great balance between action and humour. This is the kind of film I think would do well on Netflix and it's certainly worth checking out. In ninth place is The Death of Stalin, directed by Armando Iannucci and based upon the French graphic novel of the same name. Starring the likes of Steve Buscemi, Jeffrey Tambor and Michael Palin, the film tells the story of the fallout created in Soviet Russia following Stalin's death and shows the dark but humorous power struggle between his high-ranking officials. I enjoyed the film not only for its humour, but also because I genuinely felt like I was learning about this period of Russian history. There were times I had to remind myself this is based on real events, as Stalin's minions go to extreme lengths not to end up like the countless innocents his rule saw imprisoned or executed. The Death of Stalin satirically shows how, behind the curtain, even the high-up members of an imposing system like Stalinism are every bit as fallible and human as you or I. The Death of Stalin had me entertained from start to finish, and I went home and began looking up the figures that appear in it. Safe to say, a story this ridiculous can't be made up. In 8th place is the horror film Get Out. I went into this film knowing nothing about it, and I'm so glad I did. The film tells the story of a young black man travelling with his white girlfriend to meet her parents for the first time. I don't want to spoil a thing, so I'll say no more about it when it comes to the plot, but safe to say things start to get strange upon their arrival. I went in expecting a pretty standard horror flick, but what I got was so much deeper. The film is an examination of racism in the 21st century and explores ideas of slavery and armchair activists. It also features a couple of moments that made me shit a brick. Get Out is a great horror film in its own right, but scratch the surface and there's so much more to be discovered. If you've not seen the film yet, then just stop what you're doing and watch it. Don't look it up, don't see reviews, just watch it. The original Trainspotting is a dark but damn near perfect film about a group of young Scottish men being consumed by their crippling heroin addiction. When I heard a sequel was being made set 20 years later, I was incredibly sceptical, but somehow director Danny Boyle has made a sequel that's every bit as engaging as the original. The film follows Renton and his gang as they reunite after decades apart. It's great catching up with them and seeing what became of their lives, though the film doesn't wallow in nostalgia and has its own story to tell. I was surprised to find that, while certainly still adult, Trainspotting 2 is a more hopeful film than its predecessor and serves as a worthy conclusion for the gang. If you're a fan of the original, then you must give this a watch. I was a big fan of the original Guardians of the Galaxy and found it to be a refreshing change of pace from the more po-faced and gritty superhero films. Guardians 2 is easily as good as the first instalment and is a blast from start to finish. Star-Lord, Gamora, Drax, Rocket and the infantile and adorable group return for another adventure which sees the brilliant Kurt Russell star as Peter's father. The humour is totally on point throughout and the banter between the characters was so well written. The story itself feels like it's evolving and expanding the group rather than just having them spin their wheels, and I was genuinely surprised at how touching the end is. The first film introduced us to these ragtag heroes, and this one cements them as being every bit as worthy as Spider-Man or Thor. Guardians 2 proves that the original was no fluke, and I look forward to going out on a third adventure with this bunch of misfits. Coming in 5th is It. Netflix's Stranger Things had us tripping on nostalgia for all things 80s, and It capitalises on this by adapting Stephen King's classic horror book. The The film itself manages to evoke that feeling of nostalgia Stranger Things does, but despite featuring one of the kids from that show, it never felt like it was just a cheap cash-in trying to ride off the show's success. This thoroughly creepy film sees the infamous clown Pennywise terrorise a small town by stealing its children. I usually don't care much for child actors, but the cast of it are absolutely superb. I found myself really caring about the gang of kids, and, unlike most horror films, I was really rooting for them rather than the monster. That's not to say that Pennywise isn't scary. Bill Skarsgård gives a chilling performance as the demonic creature and reminded me why I hated clowns as a kid. Behind the horror of it lies a genuinely brilliant coming-of-age story, and I look forward to the sequel. Baby Driver was one of the most original and well-directed films of 2017. Director Edgar Wright has proved with films such as Hot Fuzz and Scott Pilgrim vs. the World that he knows what he's about when it comes to filmmaking, but Baby Driver is arguably his finest film to date. The film tells a genuinely engaging story with a perfect blend of comedy, action, and incredibly well shot scenes timed to music. I've never before seen a film that plays with its soundtrack the way Baby Driver does, and the car chases are the best we've seen in years. Forget the Fast and the Furious 8, Baby Driver is the best car film of 2017. Look, I'll be honest, it's pretty weird watching it now given the recent allegations against Kevin Spacey, but just try to look past him and focus on the rest of the cast, who are superb. Jon Hamm gives an excellent performance, and Jamie Foxx is absolutely terrifying as the film's antagonist. If you've not seen Baby Driver yet, then do yourself a favour, go watch it, and thank me later. Christopher Nolan is one of the most famed directors in the business, and it's not hard to see why. Films such as The Dark Knight, Inception and Interstellar have been hugely successful with both critics and moviegoers. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of Nolan's films, but I love Dunkirk because it shows a more nuanced and less is more approach to filmmaking. Dunkirk tells the story of how everyday civilians crossed the Channel from England in their boats to help evacuate over 400,000 stranded British soldiers who were being picked off by the Germans on the French beach of Dunkirk. As a war film, you'd be forgiven for going in expecting huge explosions and deafening gunfire, but Dunkirk is much more than a bombastic war flick. The film has a gritty realness to it and focuses more on the individuals rather than a huge conflict between two armies. I loved how the film is edited together, showing sequences out of chronological order and not explaining certain things right away. Hans Zimmer's music is excellent and creates a fantastic sense of tension, especially during the dogfights. I was sceptical when I heard pop singer Harry Styles had been cast, but fair play to him, he fits in very well with the rest of the cast. No mean feat when you're acting alongside the likes of Kenneth Branagh, Mark Rylance, Tom Hardy and Cillian Murphy. Dunkirk is an excellent war film for the way it respects the real men who fought and doesn't do anything to glamorise war. In second place we have Blade Runner 2049. Creating a worthy sequel to one of the greatest sci-fi films of all time is no small task, and seems downright impossible when you consider it's been over 30 years since the original film was released. Yet somehow director Denis Villeneuve managed to deliver a film that some argue surpasses the original. Blade Runner 2049 takes place decades after the first film, and sees a Blade Runner named Officer K, played excellently by Ryan Gosling, discover a conspiracy that could change how humans view replicants, and Kay finds himself seeking out Harrison Ford's Deckard for answers. Blade Runner perfectly captures the incredible dystopian sci-fi visuals of the first film, but also adds to it and makes it feel like society has progressed by decades. The music, composed this time by Hans Zimmer rather than Vangelis, is equally great, and I applaud Zimmer for managing to replicate the feeling of Vangelis' soundtrack rather than simply doing his own style. Harrison Ford and Ryan Gosling act off one another perfectly, and the supporting cast such as Robin Wright, Ana de Armas and Dave Bautista are all equally great. It's true that 2049 may not have done as well as the box office as it might have hoped, but who really cares other than investors? Shite films make millions all the time, but ultimately it's quality that's remembered, and Blade Runner 2049 is indeed quality. And finally, the coveted Tom's Nerd Corner 2017 Film of the Year award goes to The Emoji Movie! Just kidding. The real 2017 Film of the Year award goes to Logan. Look, I would be the first to admit that not every film featuring Wolverine has been of the highest quality. Looking at you, X-Men Origins Wolverine. But no other actors dedicated themselves to a superhero role quite like Hugh Jackman has. Consider this, in the past 15 years we've seen 3 film reboots of Spider-Man and 3 different actors playing him. Meanwhile, Jackman first appeared as Wolverine in 2000's X-Men and hung up the claws 17 years later with Logan. In this time, he's given his all to the role, stayed in incredible shape, and remains one of the nicest guys in Hollywood. If there were an Oscar for dedication to a role, Jackman would be a shoo-in. When Jackman first appeared on the big screen as Wolverine, I was a wide-eyed little 7-year-old. Growing up, Hugh Jackman's portrayal just felt like something that would always be around, like the sky above our heads or the constant threat of terrorism. So, when I heard that Jackman had finally decided to hang up the claws, it really felt like the end of an era. It's clear that Jackman cares a great deal about the character, and I was thrilled to hear that, for his last outing, we would finally get to see an R-rated Wolverine who didn't have to hold back. Logan is the perfect swan song for Jackman's tenure, and I think it's one of those rare superhero films that appeals even to moviegoers who don't generally care for comics. The film's excellent trailer, set to Johnny Cash's cover of Hurt, certainly looked promising, but trailers can often be deceiving. The strong reviews of the film had me hopeful going in, but I wasn't prepared for just how strong a film Logan is. Discarding tired tropes of the genre, such as world-threatening villains or plot-convenient MacGuffins, Logan is a character-driven film that's introspective and thoughtful of both its characters and of the superhero genre in general. More akin to a western than a superhero movie, Logan examines what happens to a hero after they've saved the day and what they're supposed to do once they're no longer needed. Patrick Stewart is brilliant as the tragic Charles Xavier, who has fallen so far from grace since we last saw him as Professor X, and newcomer Daphne Keegan is perfect as Laura, a new mutant who, despite her young age, is every bit as grizzled as Logan. Going into the film, I was expecting a bloody and violent good time, and I certainly got violence, but I was unprepared for just how hard Logan would tug on my heartstrings. I feel like everyone involved in this movie wanted to give Jackman's portrayal a worthy send-off, and good lord did they succeed. The film fires on all cylinders from its acting, dialogue, cinematography and action, and does a great job of passing the torch to the next generation. The next actor to pick up Logan's claws has very big boots to fill, and I wish them all the best, but Hugh Jackman will always be my Wolverine, and Logan is easily my best film of 2017. So there you have it, there are my top films of 2017. Let me know what your favourite films were, and what films you're looking forward to next year. See you next time.